Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. The seventh chapter, and 11 to 15, is authored by Jagadguru Srimad Bharati Thirtha Mahaswamigal, the 11th Acharyal of the Sringeri Sharada Peetham, the Guru of Vidyaranya Maharaj. Acharyal starts this chapter by posing an interesting question for all of us. Who is a Samsari? What do we mean by Samsara? And provides the answer. When the changeless Brahman and the changeful Jiva as a combination is presumed as the I. When we say combination, because of the superimposition, which we saw in the previous talks a few times. Brahman as Kutastha in our body and the reflected Jiva on the intellect and the Jiva eclipsing the Kutastha. And we as Jiva assuming the combination of both to be I becomes the starting point of samsara and gives an illustration as to what constitutes samsara. Just as the sun reflected in water seems dull and restless if the water is dirty and moving, so is the self reflected in the intellect seem to be going here and there. This is samsara. And Vedanta proceeds to say three aspects about this combination. One, it is so natural because out of our ignorance we tend to believe that the reflected Jiva is I, especially in its combination with the real Brahman, which is Kutastha. And because of the superimposition, the cause, which is the reflected Jiva, and the truth, which is Brahman, gets interposed. And therefore, this alloy of combination gives it, the Jiva, the strength to believe it's the I. This is one. The two subsidiary aspects are the knower of truth starts applying I very intelligently. A knower refers to I when it comes to material enjoyments and suffering to the Jiva, and refers to the same expression I when it comes to Vedanta and spiritual pursuit by saying, whenever he or she refers to consciousness or truth or limitlessness or luminosity or existence or unattachedness, as the case may be. So, an alloy or a combination of both is disfigured and severed into two. When you stay on course, whenever we speak or think or meditate on I, that I would be pure consciousness. Whenever we get into contact with the material world and start experiencing material life, those experiences have to be classified as I on the reflected Jiva. A question is posed immediately by the objectionist. After all, the whole idea is to get rid of the changeful self, which is Jiva. But it is only a reflected self. How does it know that it's the changeless self? That's the question posed by the objectionist. Vedanta answers it with an example. Somebody is born and he has a name, say Rama. He is appointed as a magistrate in a court. He wears his robes, he adorns the seat, and he delivers justice. Merely because he is discharging an official duty in the course of his employment, does he lose his birth as Rama? Answer is no. So we can have any number of superimpositions, any number of roles. It does not deter us from understanding or perceiving what is truth. And Vedanta builds one more concept over it. It says, please remember, truth is always patent. The classification is dependent on the knower and not on the truth. For someone who knows it, it is truth. For someone who doesn't know it, it still remains to be truth, to be understood by him or her, or experienced by him or her. For somebody who doesn't know, it doesn't become or it doesn't remain untruth. It is not untruth becoming truth on knowing. Not at all. Patently and evidently, it is truth always. Therefore, this significant aspect has to be understood by all. And proceeds to say further, in the process of trying to sever the I into two categories, what will happen in due course? All of us as Jivas tend to believe body alone is truth. We can move to a state where we tend to believe that Brahman alone is truth. This is the power of cognition. And this is the journey which we set out. We need to set out. Now, Vedanta gives one more example to explain that Brahman is a patent truth. 10 people decide to cross a river, sitting on a boat, and they cross the bank. They cross the river and reach the other bank, and they get up. One of them starts counting and counts up to 9 and starts weeping, saying that the 10th is missing because he has not counted himself. Then the second person comes, starts counting, finds it's only 9 and starts crying, thinking that one person is drowned. While someone else passing through that place finds this confusion and asks them a question, what's your problem? And they all answer in unison. We came, 10 of us got into the boat. But when we reached the bank, only 9 of us are here. So we don't know where the 10th person is. Then the person who is the passing through says, I think you're all mistaken. The 10th man is very much available. When he makes that statement, it becomes indirect truth. And he starts counting, including the person whom they usually leave out as their own count, and says, look here, you're 10. Then it becomes direct truth. Vedanta says, Brahman as a truth is as patent as the count of 10 people who cross the bank, who cross the river. It is as explicit. We, through the reflected Jiva and its combination, confuse the unreal I with the real I, land up in the same mess which these people landed into while doing the count. Let's continue tomorrow. Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Acharyal now proceeds to set out the 7 steps of transformation from ignorance to bliss. What are those 7 steps? Ignorance screening, distraction, indirect knowledge, direct knowledge, satisfaction, and cessation of sorrow. Let's see in detail what each one of them seek to say. What is ignorance? The reflected self, engrossed with its mind, namely the Jiva, reflected self, namely the Jiva, engrossed with its mind and the senses and enjoying the world, forgets and ignores the fact that its true nature is the changeless self, namely Brahman. This is the stage of ignorance. Then we come to the stage of screening. Because it believes the reflected self to be the truth, the changeless self, which otherwise shines and has a permanent existence, it appears to show that it does not shine and it does not exist. So the very existence becomes a matter of doubt at the screening stage. 3. The distraction. Because the reflected Jiva believes it to be the true self, it also believes it is the doer and it is the enjoyer. Because the reflection is on the intellect, sitting on the ego, which says, I am the doer and I am the enjoyer. The 4th stage is indirect knowledge. Then that Jiva starts to hear and starts to probabilize, oh, maybe we are only the reflected self. There is a complete self, a changeless self called Brahman. Indirect knowledge. Then direct knowledge. It goes into concentration, contemplation, samadhi, pure dharma, all the stages, and becomes a realized soul, and therefore acquires direct knowledge that Brahman or changeless self alone is the truth. Once it reaches that stage, it goes into the 6th stage of satisfaction. Such a Jiva, who is now a realized Jiva or a Jivan Mukta, enjoys bliss and feels what has to be done has been done, and what has to be known is known. Once it reaches the 6th stage of satisfaction, then as a consequence the 7th stage follows, cessation of sorrow. Such a Jiva which sees the entire universe without exception as an illusion. How does it matter that there is pleasure in it or pain in it? Like a dream. And therefore, such a realized soul never grieves or goes into sorrow thereafter. Acharyal proceeds to say the first 3, namely ignorance, screening, and distraction, are the 3 preliminary stages which puts the Jiva into bondage. It conceals the freedom, makes it inaccessible, and binds the Jiva through its mind and senses. How does it happen? We reach the stage of ignorance only because of 2 things. In our present life, we say we do not know Brahman is truth. And in our past lives, we have never shown the interest to inquire what is truth. So I do not know, and in absence of inquiry in the past, I have chosen not to know. Together form the basis for ignorance. Then, when it comes to screening, it happens because of an improper inquiry. Therefore, the shining, ever shining Brahman and the self luminous Brahman doesn't show to us at all, because the inquiry is not full and complete. And the stage of distraction is reached, therefore, where Maya in the case of Ishvara and Avidya in the case of Jivas starts expanding by giving subtle bodies and the gross body for us to enjoy our karmas, our past actions, to exhaust the punyas and papas accumulated over births. So distraction happens there. So total ignorance leads to screening and distraction. And therefore, the journey towards samsara commences and goes on and on and on endlessly. We end up this life without knowing Brahman. Then we go back and we return with one more birth with the same status. What is the status? I don't wish to know now, nor did I show interest to know earlier. Then we go back, come back again. Cycle is repeated. And therefore, Vedanta prescribes the fourth step. Why don't we first attempt to have an indirect knowledge of trying to know or hear or probabilize what Brahman is? Unless we get into this step, we will not dispense the attitude of doership from emanating out of the ego, from the false self or the reflected self. Till such time we first induct ourselves into indirect inquiry, there is no hope for a change. Then, once we start assimilating slowly and steadily, this will take us to direct knowledge. Vedanta gives an example. See, there is a hot water boiling in a pot. If you feel the pot from outside, you will see the heat. You will feel the heat. And that is indirect knowledge. The moment you sight the water boiling, you feel this water really boils, and that's why it's generating this heat. It becomes direct knowledge. Let's continue tomorrow. Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Vedanta makes a distinction between indirect knowledge, which later becomes direct knowledge, and mistaken knowledge. Brahman is understood, say, by hearing, by probabilizing, is indirect knowledge. Then the existence of Brahman is realized, then it becomes direct knowledge. When somebody acquires indirect knowledge, and in the process of traveling towards direct knowledge, one should not be construed as passing through the phase of discovery, so that transition is from a mistaken knowledge. There is nothing called mistaken knowledge when it comes to the study of Brahman or its experience. What is mistaken knowledge? And knowledge is a mistaken one only when it is shown or seemed to be wrong on the rise of a later knowledge. Now, it's not as though realization is a later knowledge. We have already seen that it is a patent knowledge. Its non-perception cannot make the indirect knowledge as a mistaken knowledge. That's why Vedanta makes it abundantly clear. Learning about Brahman or realizing Brahman is only direct knowledge and indirect knowledge, and at no point of time it can be said to be a mistaken knowledge. And cites three examples. Somebody is given a question paper which he doesn't understand, but he can see the paper. So the cognition of the paper and the content over it cannot be called as mistaken knowledge. He only requires the help of a teacher who can make him understand the script that is written over the paper. Paper is known to him. Take the case of a pot. Even in our practical life, when we say something, when we identify something as a pot sitting from one side, we see only one side of the pot and not the rear side. But we are able to come to a conclusion that it is a pot. Therefore, Vedanta says, when there are two aspects to Brahman, namely, Brahman is and Brahman shines. When only one aspect, namely, Brahman is cognized, then we are entitled to say Brahman is known. And this is also knowledge, but not mistaken knowledge. We come to the third example of gold. Are we not familiar with gold ornaments? When somebody suggests that this is made out of gold, how do we say so? We should get over the form. Say, suppose we see a gold necklace or a gold ring. How do we assess that this is gold? We overlook the form, we overlook the name, and see the underlying substance as gold, and come to a conclusion that this is gold. So we disassociate ourselves from the shape, name, and form. As Jivas, we have been loaded with numerous millions and tons of forms and names because of over the Brahman, because of the mistaken or the reflected self called the Jiva. And therefore, the study of Brahman first teaches us that all these are impressions created on Brahman. So that study, a thought at that level, is an indirect knowledge. And once somebody concentrates, goes to samadhi and attains and realizes it, then it matures into direct knowledge. So these numerous multiple forms needs to be negated at some stage. Now, indirect knowledge allows us to understand the aspect of non-existence. By indirect knowledge, the aspect of non-existence of Brahman vanishes. And by realizing Brahman, the non-shining aspect of Brahman vanishes. By indirect knowledge, we come to accept the fact of the existence of Brahman. And upon realization, the Brahman, whose very nature is self-luminous and shining, starts glowing, which was otherwise eclipsed through ignorance. Therefore, two more examples are cited in Panchadasi about the modes of acquisition of knowledge. Varuna teaching his son Bhrigu. Varuna guided only the basic principle to his son. It is from and out of Brahman everything emerges. From and out of it, it sustains. and from and out and into it, it goes back and dissolves, and showed him the path which enabled Bhrigu to attain Brahmanhood. In the case of Indra, when Brahma taught Indra that Brahman is something which needs to be realized as it's the only thing free from sin, Indra went to Brahma 4 times, served him for 101 years before getting enlightenment. One more example is given to make things so clear about direct knowledge. We saw the example of 10 people crossing on a boat from one end of the river to the other. When the person who was passing through starts identifying, when he says first, no, you are 10, we said that it is indirect knowledge. Then they want to know who is the 10th person. Then he shows, you are the 10th. The moment he shows you are the 10th, and that gets cognized, then please understand and remember that truth never gets negatived at any point of time. Therefore, that is why they say it is not mistaken knowledge. That is why they say it is not a discovery of knowledge. It is patent knowledge. The fact that the moment Brahman is seen and realized, Brahmanhood can never be negative thereafter. It remains forever. And the illusions around us and the reflected self in the form of Jiva has to, it becomes indifferent, and we are able to dissociate ourselves from it. And as long as prarabdha is there, the body will be there. But it becomes completely detached. And not once a realized soul falls back into the graveyard and pit of being an unrealized soul. That position never happens, says Vedanta. Let's continue.